I should have known something was off the moment my brother Sean couldn't stop smirking over Mom's famous pot roast. That grin of his always meant trouble. But this time, he took things way too far. I'm Leah, 28 years old, and growing up as Sean's little sister meant being his favorite target for pranks. Most of the time, I could laugh it off. Not tonight. Tonight changed everything. Sean tapped his wine glass with his fork, drawing everyone's attention. The whole table turned toward him: Mom, Aunt Helen, our family friend Nina, and my best friend Marcus, who I'd invited for moral support. "I've got a confession to make," Sean announced, that stupid grin stretching wider. Mom beamed at him like he was announcing a Nobel Prize win. "What is it, sweetie?" she asked. Sean leaned back, pausing for dramatic effect. My stomach churned with unease. Remember last month when Leah was complaining about her medication not working? He let the question hang in the air. I froze, every nerve on edge. Mom nodded, and Sean continued. "Well, I might have switched her pills with sugar tablets. You know, just to see what would happen." The silence at the table lasted exactly 3 seconds before Mom burst out laughing. "Oh, Sean, you didn't." "I did," he said, practically bouncing in his seat. And it was hilarious watching her freak out over nothing. My hand trembled under the table. Those pills weren't just random vitamins. They were my prescribed medication for chronic migraines. The kind of migraines that left me curled up in a dark room for days. The ones that made me miss work and almost lose my job. "That's not funny," Aunt Helen said slowly, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. "Those are prescription medications." "Please," Mom waved her hand dismissively. "Leah's always been dramatic about her headaches. A little placebo effect probably did her some good." Marcus's hand found mine under the table and gave a reassuring squeeze. When I met his gaze, his face was tight with barely restrained anger. "So that's why I was in excruciating pain for weeks," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "That's why I almost lost my job." Sean rolled his eyes. "Come on, Leah. It was just a joke." "A joke?" My chair scraped against the hardwood floor as I pushed it back and stood. "I ended up in the ER, Sean. Remember that? Or were you too busy laughing at your own brilliance?" "Leah, honey, sit down," Mom said, her tone scolding. She was still fighting back giggles. "You're making a scene." I scanned the table. Aunt Helen shook her head in disgust. Nina stared at her plate, clearly uncomfortable. Only Marcus met my gaze, giving me a slight nod of support. "Making a scene?" I grabbed my water glass, my hand trembling. "You want to see a scene?" "Leah," Marcus warned softly. I slammed the glass down, water splashing onto the pristine white tablecloth. Mom gasped, clutching her pearls like I'd just flipped the entire table. "You know what?" I said, voice rising. "I'm done. I'm done with your pranks, Sean. I'm done with you laughing them off, Mom. And I'm especially done with being the family joke." "Oh, don't be so sensitive," Sean called after me as I headed for the door. "It's not like you died or anything." I stopped at the doorway, my gaze landing on Mom's prized collection of glass elephant figurines. They sat on a shelf in the corner, 32 delicate crystal elephants, each one polished to perfection. They'd been passed down from Grandma, who'd cherished them more than anything, maybe even more than her own children. "No, Sean," I said quietly. "I didn't die, but something will." "What's that supposed to mean?" Mom asked, her tone finally catching a hint of worry. I forced a smile. "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Enjoy your dinner." As I walked out, I heard Aunt Helen's voice, cutting through the tension like a knife. "You should be ashamed of yourselves." Marcus caught up with me in the driveway. "Leah, wait," he called. I was pacing, my hands clenched into fists. "Did you see them? Did you see how they laughed?" He grabbed my shoulders, gently forcing me to stop. "I saw, and it was messed up. But what are you going to do?" I glanced back at the house. Through the window, the elephants caught the last rays of evening light, their crystal bodies glowing. 32 perfect pieces, each worth a small fortune. I don't know yet, I admitted. But then I looked at Marcus, a plan already starting to form in my mind. Those elephants have been watching this family's drama for 3 generations. Maybe it's time they did more than just watch. Marcus's eyes widened slightly. Leah, don't worry, I said, already feeling calmer as the idea solidified. I'm not going to do anything crazy. I glanced at the elephants one more time, catching the way the light refracted through them. I'm just going to make sure karma does its job. 3 days after the dinner disaster, I was back at Mom's house, pretending everything was fine. The elephants glinted in the afternoon sun as I helped her with the dishes, their crystal bodies casting rainbow patterns on the walls. I just don't understand why you're still upset, Mom said, handing me a plate to dry. Sean apologized. I placed the plate down harder than I meant to. No, he didn't. He texted me, sorry or mad, LOL, with a crying laughing emoji. That's not an apology. Mom scrubbed at a pot that was already clean. Oh, you know how he is. He means well. From the living room, Sean's voice carried through the house. Hey, Mom. Where's that old photo album from Leah's awkward phase? The one with the braces? My grip on the dish towel tightened. Of course. Let me guess, I said, turning to Mom. He's going to scan those pictures and post them online? Oh, Leah, she flicked water at me like I was being dramatic. He's just being a big brother. A big brother who tampered with my medication, I shot back. Do you even realize how serious that was? I could have pressed charges. Mom's face darkened. Don't you dare threaten your brother. I laughed bitterly. Of course. Protect precious Sean. Who cares if your daughter ended up in the hospital? Found it! Sean's triumphant voice rang out, followed by laughter. Oh man, these are gold! I stormed into the living room, where Sean was sprawled on the couch, flipping through my middle school pictures. His stupid grin hadn't changed a bit. Remember when you had that massive zit at graduation? He said, holding up a picture. I think it's in here somewhere. I snatched the album out of his hands. You know what I remember. Lying in a dark room for 3 days straight last month because my meds mysteriously stopped working. Oh my God, are you still on about that? He rolled his eyes. It was just a joke. Still on about it? I clenched the album so hard my knuckles went white. Yeah, Sean, I'm still on about it. Because while you were laughing your ass off, I was missing work, throwing up from pain, and wondering why my medication wasn't helping. Mom rushed in, her apron still on. Leah, give your brother back the album. Why? I held it behind my back. So he can humiliate me more? It's just pictures. Sean stood up and reached for the album. Don't be such a drama queen. Drama queen? My voice cracked with rage. You messed with my health, Sean. My actual health. Do you have any idea what it feels like to lie in bed, your head splitting open, unable to even look at light without wanting to scream? Sean shrugged. I said I was sorry. No, you didn't, I snapped. You've never been sorry for anything you've done to me. Behind Sean, the elephant collection sat quietly on the shelf. Their crystal faces reflected the afternoon light, as calm and unbothered as always. One piece in particular caught my eye, a baby elephant with its trunk raised. Mom always said it was her favorite, and supposedly it brought good luck. I stared at that elephant, and suddenly, I knew exactly what I needed to do. You want to know what your joke cost me? I pulled out my phone, opening my banking app. Here's the ER bill. $2,800. Sean barely glanced at the screen. Not my problem. Exactly. I shoved my phone back in my pocket. Nothing is ever your problem. Both of you, stop it. Mom stepped between us, her tone sharp. Leah, you're being ridiculous. Sean didn't mean any harm. He never does, I whispered. But he always causes it. I turned to leave, but Sean's voice followed me. Where are you going? To cry to Marcus about how mean we are? I paused, looking back at the elephants, especially that baby one. A smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. No, Sean, I'm going to do what you taught me. His smirk faltered. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I said with a shrug, mimicking his carefree tone. Just that maybe it's time I developed a sense of humor too. Mom's eyes narrowed. Leah, I'm fine. I walked toward the door. You'll see. I'm totally fine. Behind me, I heard Mom comforting Sean, telling him I'd get over it eventually. She had no idea that I already had something better in mind. Getting over it wasn't the plan anymore. That night I called Nina. She picked up on the second ring. Leah, are you okay? I've been thinking about you ever since that dinner. I'm fine, I said, though my heart was pounding. Hey, remember how you mentioned you work with an auction house? Yeah. Her voice was cautious. Why? I have a question about crystal figurines. There was a pause. The elephants? Yeah. I took a deep breath. Mom's collection. How much do you think they're worth? Nina's hesitation was obvious. Leah, are you sure you want to go down this road? Absolutely. My voice was steady now. It's time for a little karma. 2 days later, I was at Aunt Helen's house. Her kitchen always smelled like cinnamon and coffee, comforting, familiar smells that usually calmed my nerves, but not today. He did what? Aunt Helen slammed her coffee mug down so hard it sloshed over the side. Switched my medication, I said, watching her face turn red with anger. And Mom thought it was hilarious. Of course she did. Helen wiped up the spill with quick, angry movements. Your mom always lets that boy get away with murder. But this? This is criminal, Leah. Literally criminal. I know. I picked at the edge of a cookie, but pressing charges would destroy the family. Helen let out a bitter laugh. Honey, they're doing a fine job of that all by themselves. My phone buzzed. A text from Nina. Research done? Collection worth minimum $50K. Some pieces much more. Call me. Aunt Helen noticed my expression. What is it? I showed her the text. Her eyebrows shot up. The elephants? I always knew they were valuable, but... I'm going to sell them, I said quietly. All of them. Helen sat down heavily across from me. Leah, before you try to talk me out of it, I'm not. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand. I'm going to help you. I blinked in surprise. What? Helen squeezed my hand. Those elephants have been watching this family's dysfunction for decades. Your grandmother, my mother, wouldn't have wanted them sitting in that house, witnessing more. My phone buzzed again. Nina, there's an auction next month focused on crystal collections. Very exclusive. Timing couldn't be better. Helen's smile turned sly. Well then, let's start planning. Those elephants aren't going to sell themselves. Mom was hosting her bridge club tonight, which meant her house would be empty for at least 3 hours. I checked my watch as Marcus pulled his car into the shadows 2 houses down. My heart was pounding, but I kept my face calm. You're sure about the alarm code? Marcus asked. Yeah, 4782, I said, rolling my eyes. Sean's birth year, of course it's him. Marcus nodded, squeezing my shoulder. Ready? I took a deep breath. Ready. We waited, watching Mom's car disappear around the corner, her bridge club friends chattering as they drove away. The house sat dark and quiet, except for the porch light she always left on. We moved quickly across the lawn, my spare key sliding easily into the lock. I punched in the alarm code, my fingers trembling. The little green light blinked on. We were in... The house felt different at night, darker, emptier. The silence pressed down on us as we headed toward the dining room, and there they were, Mom's beloved elephant collection, gleaming on the shelves in the moonlight. Start with the small ones, I whispered, even though no one was home. They're in the front. Marcus nodded, pulling out the padded boxes we'd brought. He worked methodically, wrapping each piece in bubble wrap while I took pictures of every elephant for documentation. Each figurine had its own story. The baby elephant from my 5th birthday, the mother and calf pair from Mom's wedding, the majestic bull elephant that had been Grandma's favorite, the last piece she added before she passed. I picked it up carefully, holding it in my hands longer than I meant to. "Leah?" Marcus's voice was soft. "You okay?" I realized I was staring at the bull elephant, lost in thought. She left these to Mom because she thought they'd be safe. She never knew what this family would become. "We can still stop," Marcus said gently. "No." I shook my head and carefully wrapped the bull elephant. "We're doing this." My phone buzzed. A text from Aunt Helen. "Bridge club spotted at Carol's house. All clear." I felt a surge of relief. "We're good. Let's move faster." We worked in silence, packing the elephants with care. It took just under 20 minutes to box them all up, 32 figurines in total. When we were done, the display cabinet stood empty, its glass shelves bare. Marcus glanced at the cabinet. "Looks like a mouth with all the teeth pulled out." I let out a short laugh. "Yeah, kind of poetic, right?" He gave me a serious look. "Last chance to back out." I stared at the empty cabinet, remembering all the times Mom let me help clean those elephants. How proud she was of them, how she'd tell their stories over and over. Then I remembered her laughing at dinner, dismissing my pain, protecting Sean. "Let's go." The drive to the storage unit was tense. Every car behind us looked like Mom's. Every red light stretched into eternity. But finally, we pulled up to find Aunt Helen and Nina waiting. "Everything okay?" Helen asked, helping us unload. "Perfect," I said, handing Nina the first box. "They're all here." Nina opened the box and lifted out the baby elephant. "Oh my! These are even more beautiful than I remembered. The auction house is going to love them." "When are they picking them up?" I asked. "Tomorrow," Nina said. "The auction's in 3 weeks, and these will be the centerpiece." 3 weeks? My stomach lurched. Mom will notice they're gone way before then. "That's the point, isn't it?" Helen said, stacking the boxes inside the storage unit. "Let her feel what it's like to lose something precious." My phone buzzed again, a text from Mom. "Bridge club ended early. Carol's husband had an emergency. Coming home now. Want to stop by for tea?" "She's heading home," I said, my voice shaking. Marcus checked his watch. We got out just in time. We locked up the storage unit, making sure everything was secure. As we said our goodbyes, Helen pulled me into a tight hug. "Your grandmother would be proud," she whispered. "Sometimes love means standing up for yourself." Back in Marcus's car, my phone started ringing. Mom's name lit up the screen. "Here we go," I muttered, declining the call. A new text popped up. "Taylor, the elephants are gone. Someone broke in. Call me now." Then another. "Please tell me you didn't take them." And another. "Your brother is furious. What have you done?" I turned off my phone and leaned back in the seat. "You know there's no going back now," Marcus said quietly. "Good," I replied, watching the storage unit disappear in the side mirror. "I'm done going backward. From now on, we're only moving forward." The auction house buzzed with quiet energy. Well-dressed people milled around, sipping champagne and admiring the displays. And there, in the center of it all, sat Mom's elephants. Each one arranged perfectly, catching the light just the way she used to do at home. "Bidding starts in 10 minutes, Nina whispered, appearing at my elbow. "Are you sure you want to stay and watch?" I nodded, clutching my auction paddle like a lifeline. I need to see this through. For the past 3 weeks, my phone had been blowing up. Mom's messages had ranged from desperate pleas to angry threats. Sean had left one voicemail. "You've lost your mind, you know that?" Marcus nudged me. "Look." He pointed to a woman across the room, examining the baby elephant. "She's from the Women's Clinic Board." I'd done my research. She had the funds to make a serious bid. "Perfect," I whispered. The auctioneer's voice boomed through the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We're about to begin." Helen squeezed my hand as we sat down. "Whatever happens, you're doing the right thing." The first few lots went quickly: antique vases, rare books, vintage jewelry. Then the auctioneer announced, Lot 47, the Eleanor Holmes Crystal Elephant Collection, 32 pieces. Mint condition with full provenance documentation. Opening bid, $50,000. A paddle went up immediately. Then another, and another, 60,000, 75, 80. My heart raced as the numbers climbed. The woman from the women's clinic kept bidding, her face determined. 120,000, she called out. The room fell silent. The auctioneer looked around. Going once? My phone buzzed again. A text from Mom. The police are involved now. You've gone too far. Going twice. Another paddle shot up. 150. The clinic board member didn't hesitate. 175. 200, the other bidder countered. The clinic member shook her head. She was out. 200,000, the auctioneer said. Going once, going twice. I raised my paddle. 250. Gasps rippled through the room. Nina's eyes widened. The other bidder turned to look at me, then slowly lowered their paddle. Sold. To paddle number 47. Marcus hissed. What are you doing? I stood, legs shaking. Excuse me, I called out. I'd like to donate this entire collection to the Downtown Women's Health Clinic, in honor of my grandmother, Eleanor Holmes. The applause was thunderous as I stepped down from the podium. People I'd never met shook my hand, thanking me for my generosity. Cameras flashed as reporters gathered around. But all I could focus on was the elephant collection, now proudly on display in a glass case behind me. For the first time, those elephants had a purpose beyond gathering dust in Mom's house. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting another angry text from Mom. Instead, it was a voicemail from Sean. You've really done it this time, Leah, his voice growled. You've embarrassed the entire family. Hope it was worth it. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. Oh, it was worth it. The next morning, I woke to another flood of texts. Mom, we need to talk. Please come to dinner tonight. Sean, guess you're the family hero now. Congrats. Mom again. Please, Leah, we need to fix this. I sighed, scrolling through the messages. Part of me wanted to ignore them, but another part, the part that had spent years being the family scapegoat, wanted to see this through. Dinner tonight? Marcus asked as he handed me a cup of coffee. Yep, I muttered. Mom's calling for a family meeting, probably to stage an ambush. He smirked. Need backup? I took a sip of coffee. Definitely. That evening, I arrived last, deliberately late. Walking into Mom's house felt different this time. The air was thick with tension, and the once proud elephant display cabinet now stood empty in the corner, like a ghost of what used to be. Well, well, Sean drawled from his seat at the dining table. Look who finally decided to grace us with her presence. Sean? Mom warned, but her tone was weak. She was wringing her hands, her eyes darting between me and the empty cabinet. Taylor, honey, she said with a forced smile. Sit down. I made your favorite, tuna casserole. I couldn't help but laugh. Tuna casserole stopped being my favorite when I was 12. You'd know that if you actually listened to me. Aunt Helen was already seated, positioned like a protective barrier between me and the rest of the family. Marcus sat next to me, his steady presence keeping me calm. I saw you on the news, Sean said, stabbing his fork into his food. Real dramatic performance. Did you enjoy destroying Mom's inheritance? I met his glare head on. About as much as you enjoyed destroying my health. Enough, Mom said, her voice trembling. We need to talk about what you did. I sprinkled salt on my food, taking my time. Funny. That's exactly what I wanted to do after Sean's little prank, but nobody seemed interested then. That was different, Mom protested. How? I set my fork down. How exactly was it different? Because it was just a joke, Sean exploded. This was theft. Aunt Helen shook her head. No, Sean. This was consequences. Something you've managed to avoid your entire life. Stay out of this, Helen, Mom snapped. Why should she? I asked. my voice rising. She's the only one in this family who's been honest about our problems. Problems? Mom's voice rose too. We don't have problems. We had a beautiful collection of family heirlooms that you sold out of spite. I laughed bitterly. Sold? No, Mom. I didn't sell them. I donated them to help people who can't afford medical care. You know, like when I couldn't afford my ER visit after Sean's hilarious medication swap. The room went dead silent. Even Sean had the decency to look uncomfortable. I pulled out my phone and held it up. $250,000. That's how much those elephants were worth, and that money is going to help people who won't have to wonder if their family members tampered with their meds for fun. Sean muttered. I said I was sorry. No, I snapped, slamming my hand on the table. You didn't. You sent a text with laughing emojis. Mom reached for my hand, but I pulled away. We can fix this, she whispered. We'll buy the elephants back. They're not for sale. I stood up, looking down at both of them. They belong to the clinic now, and you know what? Grandma would have been proud. Don't you dare bring your grandmother into this, Mom hissed, her voice breaking. Why not? I shot back. They were her elephants first, and she believed in helping people, doing what's right. Unlike some people in this family. Sean stood up too, towering over me. You want to talk about doing what's right? How about respecting family property? How about respecting your sister's health? Marcus cut in, his voice steady. How about not treating someone's medical condition like a joke? This isn't about you, Sean snapped at him. No, I agreed, stepping between them. It's about accountability, something this family seems allergic to. Mom started crying. Real tears this time, not the crocodile ones she usually turned on to get her way. Those elephants were all I had left of your grandmother, she whispered. No, Mom. My voice softened. You had me. You had a daughter who needed your support, your protection, but you chose to laugh instead. Her tears fell harder as she sank back into her chair. I didn't... She trailed off, the realization dawning in her eyes. I didn't think. I didn't care. Which is it? I asked quietly. Because either way, you failed me. The silence stretched on, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Finally, Sean spoke. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. I really messed up, didn't I? Yeah, I said. You did. Mom wiped her eyes. What can we do to make it right? You can start by actually listening, I said. There's a dedication ceremony tomorrow at the clinic for the new Eleanor Holmes Medical Assistance Fund. You're welcome to come. The next afternoon, the clinic's conference room buzzed with activity. Staff arranged chairs and hung a banner that read, Eleanor Holmes Medical Assistance Fund. The elephants stood proudly in their new display case, catching the afternoon sun just like they used to in Mom's house. Leah, Dr. Sarah, the clinic director, touched my arm. Are you ready to begin? If you'd like to say a few words. I nodded, adjusting my note cards. The room was packed, staff, local media, and even some former patients. Aunt Helen and Marcus sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Then the door opened. Mom walked in, followed by Sean. They both looked smaller somehow, less sure of themselves. Mom's eyes immediately locked on the elephants, and I saw her hands clench into fists before relaxing. I didn't think you'd come, I said as they approached. We almost didn't, Sean admitted. But then we saw the news report about what the fund will do. Before I could respond, Dr. Sarah called everyone to attention. Welcome, everyone. Today marks a new chapter for our clinic, she said, explaining the fund's purpose, helping patients afford crucial medications and treatments. And now, she smiled, I'd like to introduce Leah Holmes, whose generous donation made this possible. The room applauded as I stepped up to the podium. My prepared speech suddenly felt wrong, so I set the note cards aside. 3 months ago, I began, someone switched my medication with sugar pills as a joke. I looked directly at Sean. I ended up in the ER, unable to afford the treatment I needed. Mom shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but I kept going. But this isn't about revenge. It's about transformation. I gestured to the elephants. These figurines have watched over my family for 3 generations. Now they're going to watch over people who need help, who need hope. The applause echoed through the room as I stepped back from the podium. My heart was pounding, but not from nerves, from relief. I had finally said what needed to be said, not just to the audience but to Mom and Sean too. Doctor. Sarah took the mic again. Thanks to the Eleanor Holmes Fund, we've already helped 3 patients this week, and this is just the beginning. As people mingled, I kept an eye on Mom and Sean. They stayed near the back, quiet and out of place in the cheerful, bustling crowd. Do you think they're going to bolt? Marcus asked, handing me a glass of water. No. I shook my head. They're stubborn. They'll stay. Sure enough, a few minutes later, Sean made his way toward me. He looked different, humbled, maybe for the first time in his life. Can we talk? He asked, his voice low. Please. Mom followed close behind, her makeup streaked from tears. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. I crossed my arms, keeping my guard up. What do you want to say? Sean glanced at the elephant display, then back at me. I get it now. What I did? It wasn't just a prank. I could have seriously hurt you, maybe even worse. Yes, I said bluntly. You could have. Mom wiped her eyes. And I enabled it. I laughed it off when I should have protected you. You did, I agreed, not letting them off the hook. Both of you did. Sean rubbed the back of his neck, looking down at his shoes like a guilty kid. I'm really sorry, Leah. Not with emojis, not with excuses. Just sorry. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. Mom reached out, hesitantly touching my arm. I failed you, Taylor. As a mother. You did, I said softly. But you don't have to keep failing. We stood there in silence for a moment. Then Sean gestured toward the elephant display. Grandma would have approved of what you did, wouldn't she? Aunt Helen, who had been standing nearby, stepped in. She absolutely would have. Don't you remember how she volunteered at the free clinic every week? Mom nodded slowly. I forgot about that. I forgot a lot of things. Grandma believed that beautiful things should have a purpose, I said, watching Mom's eyes lock on the baby elephant in the display. That's why I did this, not to hurt you, to help people, to make something good come out of all that pain. A young woman approached us, smiling nervously. Dr. Sarah introduced her. Leah, this is Jessica. She received her migraine medication yesterday thanks to the fund. Jessica hugged me without warning. Thank you, she whispered. I've been choosing between medicine and groceries for months. You have no idea what this means to me. I hugged her back, feeling my throat tighten. As she walked away, I noticed Sean and Mom watching her with wide eyes. How much? Sean asked, his voice cracking. How much does the fund need to help more people like her? I narrowed my eyes. Are you serious? He pulled out his checkbook, nodding. Yeah, it's time I grew up, right? Mom fumbled in her purse. Count me in too. I watched, stunned, as they wrote checks for amounts larger than I ever expected. They handed them to Dr. Sarah, who blinked in surprise. Wow, she said. This will help so many people. Sean turned to me, his expression softer than I'd ever seen. I can't fix what I did, but I can make sure it never happens again. I nodded, my anger slowly melting into something else. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but seeing them take responsibility made it possible. The next week, I stood in Mom's living room, staring at the empty display cabinet. It felt different now, not like a missing tooth, but like a blank slate. I'm glad it's gone, Mom said quietly from behind me. I turned to see her standing there, holding a small gift bag. What's that? Something for you. She handed it to me with a nervous smile. I opened the bag and pulled out a small crystal elephant. Not one from the original collection, a new one. I found it at an antique shop, she said. I thought it could be a symbol of a new beginning. I traced the elephant's smooth surface, feeling a lump rise in my throat. It's perfect. Sean walked in, wearing an apron and carrying a tray. Dinner's ready. I only burned the garlic bread a little. You cooked? I raised an eyebrow. He shrugged. Taking a cooking class. Turns out there are better hobbies than pranking your sister. We all sat down at the table. Mom, Sean, Aunt Helen, Marcus, and me. For the first time in years, the conversation flowed naturally. No tense undercurrents, no awkward silences. Just family, trying to find their way back to each other. Before we ate, I pulled out my phone. I have something for you both. Mom and Sean exchanged nervous glances as I handed them each an envelope. What's this? Mom asked, opening hers. Read it out loud, I suggested. Mom cleared her throat. Dear Mrs. Holmes, thanks to your recent donation to the Eleanor Holmes Fund, we were able to provide emergency medication to twins Sarah and Samuel, age 6. Their mother wrote, I can finally sleep at night knowing my babies can breathe properly. Her voice cracked as she looked at the picture included in the letter. 2 smiling kids holding their inhalers. Sean opened his envelope next. Your contribution helped Janet, age 29, receive critical migraine treatment. She's now back at work and able to support her family. He glanced up at me, his eyes misty. You're keeping track? I nodded. The clinic sends monthly updates. I thought you'd want to know what those elephants are doing now. There's more, Marcus said, nodding toward the gift bag. Mom pulled out a small photo album. The cover had a picture of the elephant collection in its new home at the clinic. She opened it, flipping through photos of patients, doctors, and families posing with the display. Each picture had a story, medications provided, treatments funded, lives changed. This is what Grandma's legacy looks like now, I said softly. Not just beautiful things behind glass, but real help for real people. Sean wiped his eyes quickly. I actually have something too. He disappeared into the kitchen and came back with his own envelope. I registered for a pharmacy technician program. What? I blinked in surprise. Yeah, well. He shuffled his feet. After everything, I want to help people get the right medications, make sure they're safe, maybe even work at the clinic someday. Mom stood up suddenly, walking over to the single elephant now displayed on a small table. She touched it gently, her voice soft. Your grandmother used to say that beautiful things should have beautiful purposes. She turned to us, her eyes shining. I think we finally understand what she meant. We do, I agreed. It took some tough love to get there, but we do. A week after our dinner, Mom invited us over again. This time there was no tension in the air, no lingering resentment. It felt lighter, different. As Marcus and I pulled up to the house, I clutched a small gift bag in my lap, my heart thudding softly. Through the window, I could see Mom setting the table. No fancy china this time, just regular plates and silverware. Progress. You ready for this? Marcus asked, giving me a reassuring smile. I nodded. Yeah, I think so. Inside, the living room looked different too. The empty display cabinet was gone. In its place stood a small table with a single crystal elephant, the one Mom had given me last week. Mom rushed over as soon as we stepped inside, pulling me into a warm hug. Taylor, I made lasagna, she said proudly. Real lasagna, not tuna casserole. You remembered, I said surprised. I'm trying, she replied, squeezing my hand. Really trying. Sean peeked out from the kitchen, wearing another apron. You're just in time. I only burned the garlic bread a little this time. You cooked? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Turns out cooking is therapeutic, he said with a shrug. And, well, there are better ways to spend my time than pranking you. We all settled around the table, the conversation flowing naturally. No awkward silences, no biting remarks, just family, sharing a meal and rebuilding something we'd lost along the way. Before we started eating, I pulled out the gift bag. I have something for both of you. Mom and Sean exchanged nervous glances as I handed them each an envelope. What's this? Mom asked, opening hers carefully. "Read it out loud," I suggested. Mom cleared her throat, her voice steady but emotional. "Dear Mrs. Holmes, thanks to your recent donation to the Eleanor Holmes Fund, we were able to provide emergency medication to twins Sarah and Samuel, age 6. Their mother wrote, 'I can finally sleep at night knowing my babies can breathe properly.'" She looked at the picture inside, a photo of 2 kids, each holding an inhaler and grinning from ear to ear. Sean opened his envelope next. "Your contribution helped Janet, age 29, receive critical migraine treatment. She's now back at work and able to support her family." He looked up, his eyes glistening. "You been keeping track?" I nodded. "The clinic sends me updates every month. I thought you'd want to know what those elephants are doing now." Mom reached into the gift bag again, pulling out a small photo album. The cover featured a picture of the elephant collection in its new home at the clinic. "Open it," I urged. She did, flipping through photos of patients, doctors, and families posing with the display. Each photo told a story: medications provided, treatments funded, lives changed. "This," I said softly, "is what Grandma's legacy looks like now. Not just beautiful things behind glass, but real help for real people." Sean wiped his eyes quickly, trying to hide his emotion. I've got something too." He disappeared into the kitchen and came back holding his own envelope. "I registered for a pharmacy technician program," he said, handing it to me. "What?" I blinked, stunned. "Yeah. After everything that happened, I realized I want to help people. Make sure they get the right medications. Maybe even work at the clinic someday." Mom covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes filling with tears. "Sean, I know I can't change the past," he said, looking at me. "But I can try to make things right going forward." For once, I believed him. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Mom stood by the little table where the new elephant sat, tracing its smooth surface with her fingers. "You know," she said softly, "your grandmother used to say that beautiful things should have beautiful purposes." She turned to me, her eyes shining. "I think we finally understand what she meant." "We do," I agreed. "It took some tough love to get there, but we do." As we stood there in the quiet house, I felt something shift between us, something that had been broken for a long time. It wasn't perfect, we weren't perfect, but it was a start. A few days later, the clinic posted a picture on their social media, a patient standing next to the elephant display with a caption that read, "The Eleanor Holmes Fund has now helped over 100 patients in need. Here's to 100 more." Marcus showed me the post on his phone, grinning. "They've helped 100 patients already." I couldn't help but smile. That's incredible. "Ready for the best part?" he asked, nudging me gently. "They want you to come speak at their next fundraiser." "Me?" I raised an eyebrow. "Yep, you." He grinned. "The woman who turned her family's heirlooms into a life-saving legacy." I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, let's do it." The next Sunday, we all gathered at Mom's house again for dinner. There was no tension, no awkward silences, just laughter, conversation, and the warmth of family finally coming together. Before we ate, Sean raised his glass. "To the elephants." Mom smiled, raising hers too. "To growth." Aunt Helen chimed in, arriving right on time with dessert. "To family." I lifted my water glass, feeling lighter than I had in months. To all of it, everything we lost, and everything we found. As we clinked our glasses together, the single crystal elephant on the table caught the evening light, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the walls. It was different now. Everything was different. But it was beautiful in its own way. Sometimes, the best endings aren't about getting back what you lost. They're about discovering something better in its place. We'd lost a collection of crystal elephants, sure, but we'd gained something far more precious: understanding, growth, and a family that finally knew how to love each other properly. And somewhere, I knew Grandma was smiling. Story 2. We're divorcing because my lover is expecting a child. Examine the court documents and reply as soon as possible. Gather your belongings and head off right now. Incredulous, I gazed at the screen, frozen. In addition to the announcement of a baby, my spouse had been having an affair. There was too much to take in at once. I called him repeatedly, my hands shaking, but he never answered. Each time, the calls ended up in voicemail, left with no other option. After a while, I just said yes. After I moved out, a month went by. I didn't speak to him at all throughout that period. There was only stillness, no explanation, no closure. Then he suddenly began phoning me constantly. At first, I didn't answer the calls since I thought we would only chat about his insistence on putting me down, but eventually I did. He became furious the instant I responded, shouting at me for reasons I couldn't fathom. I was shaken by it, but I chose not to continue. My life had already begun to go on. Mark and his mother had a comparatively easy married life with my spouse. In actuality, my mother-in-law and I had become close over the years. Before I realized how fortunate I was, I thought the entire mother-in-law drama cliché was overblown. My coworkers frequently complained about their in-laws, telling me horrifying tales of their unrelenting criticism and meddling. I became aware of how lucky I was to have a loving and encouraging mother-in-law as a result of their experiences. She treated me with the same deference and politeness that I tried to show her when she became unwell and was admitted to the hospital. In order to care for her, I made the decision to work from home. At first, Mark was meant to take care of her, but I was left to do everything. She would say, "Thank you for everything," with an apologetic grin, even when she was feeble. I apologize for being such a bother. It's not at all a hardship. I would tell her that I truly cared about her and wanted her to feel loved and at ease. We spent a lot of peaceful time together, watching movies, drinking tea, or shopping online when she felt like it. With a sad smile, she would frequently joke that Mark had called him a lack of sympathy. When he gets home from work, he just sleeps around. Half laughing, she would say, "When I'm out of here, I'll lecture him." Unfortunately, she never had the opportunity. Shortly after her death, she died, created a profound hole in my heart. I was by myself in the house after the funeral, thinking back on her. Even though her image showed her smiling contentedly, I couldn't stop staring at it, and it just made me miss her more. Following the funeral, Mark did not return home. He hadn't even gone to see his mother in her last days. I was devastated for her as much as for myself. She had passed away without having a final glimpse of her son. I reached out, determined to face him. I called and emailed him, but he seldom ever answered. When he did, he would either hang up in the middle of the discussion or respond with a terse response. We felt as though a huge wall separated us. My phone rang with a fresh email notification one evening when I was sitting in the empty house. It came from Mark. I read it with a racing heart, partly expecting an explanation or apology, but the content seemed eerily familiar. "My mistress is expecting a child. I'd like a divorce. Examine the court documents and reply as soon as possible. Gather your belongings and head off right now." It seemed unbelievable to me. Was this woman the same as the last one? Had she gotten pregnant once more? Tears invaded my eyes, blurring the words on the screen. Was this truly how a 17-year marriage was going to end? I tried phoning him again with an impersonal email, but the call went directly to voicemail. Tears ran down my cheeks as I heard the icy computerized message. All of it was overpowering reality. My world seemed to be falling apart. All of this occurred too soon after my mother-in-law passed away. I hadn't even had time to grieve her in a decent manner. I was also dealing with the breakdown of my marriage. The divorce was completed 1 month later. For the first time in 17 years, I started living alone after moving into a modest one-story home. Although it was a change, I was surprised to discover that it brought me calm. I kept working from home, a practice I developed while taking care of my mother-in-law. It seemed like a lifeline now. I had never felt so free as I did now that I could work from any place with only a computer. Relocating to live alone was more pleasant than I had anticipated. Even though I was still feeling depressed, I was gradually moving on. I was resolved to reconstruct my life on my own terms, and every day was a step toward recovery. I find it so much simpler to take care of myself now. I loved my mother-in-law very much, so taking care of her never seemed like a hardship. However, it was far more stressful than I had anticipated to wait for Matthew's uncertain return. Matthew would never have an affair, I thought, even when friends inquired as to whether I ever had any reservations about him. I chuckled. Off. Not Matthew. He's not that sort of man, in my opinion. However, I've now reached an unpleasant understanding. Individuals evolve. Even though he didn't have much success in his career, the Matthew I fell in love with was dedicated and kind. However, he changed completely with time. I didn't realize it was occurring since the transition was moving so slowly. In retrospect, I ought to have recognized the warning indications. He left me in charge of everything. Give up on our connection and become a stranger. My once loved boyfriend was no longer trustworthy and nice. Now it seemed useless to linger on the past. I needed a respite, a time to clear my mind of these burdensome ideas. I got up from my desk. I made a cup of coffee and ate a piece of cake that I had purchased the day before. One benefit of working from home is this. With a little smile, I thought, as I carried my cake and coffee back to my seat and tasted the deliciousness. It made me feel better than I had anticipated. For the first time in a long, long time. I was happy. I no longer felt anything for Matthew, and a feeling of calm was brought about by that insight. My phone vibrated on the table while I was enjoying this newfound serenity. I caught a glimpse of Matthew's name flashing on the screen. I felt a little sad. However, I wasn't going to allow him to spoil the positive atmosphere. I had put forth a lot of effort to succeed. I chose not to respond. He had, after all, previously rejected my many calls. A taste of his own medicine. Wouldn't it be fair? I put my phone on mute, ignored it, and made an effort to concentrate on my job. However, the buzzing continued. The phone kept vibrating as call after call came in. It was hard to focus. I caved in and said hi at last. I spoke in a cool but wary tone. "What are you doing, in your opinion?" Before I could speak another word, Matthew's booming voice interrupted. He sounded irate, almost desperate. "The tower apartment is ready to evict me. Tell me about this." Already worn out from the chat, I sighed. "For weeks, I've been attempting to speak with you about this." I responded, "But you refused to return my calls or emails. You paid me no attention at all. Therefore, don't hold me responsible." I shook my head angrily at his shouting on the other end. Had I simply become accustomed to it over the years, or was he always this challenging? What did you do? His voice was abrasive and accusatory as he demanded. "The flat was sold by me," I said plainly. The line paused for a moment. "What are you?" After a moment of disbelief, his voice became a little softer, as though he was still in shock at what he had just heard. "Did you sell it?" "That's my flat in the tower. You can't do anything you want just because we're divorced. Furthermore, you can't lecture me just because your mistress is pregnant." My voice shot back. Firm, yet steady. After a lengthy period of quiet, he replied, "You have some nerve to say that to me." A surge of rage sprang in my breast. "How many times have I tried to get in touch with you? I lost my temper. I emailed and I phoned. I made every effort to have a conversation with you, but you disregarded me. You disregarded everything, Matthew. Moreover, you have the gall to pretend that I am the villain now." He hadn't anticipated this aspect of me, I could tell. Since I had departed in silence, he most likely assumed I wasn't upset. But after everything, how could I not feel angry? "I'm now occupied with work." I spoke aggressively. "I'm going to hang up now. Farewell." I hung up the phone before he could reply. My hands shook a little. Out of irritation, not fear. How egotistical could somebody be? Almost instantly, the phone began to buzz once more. I didn't want to get drawn into another dispute, even when Matthew's name flashed on the screen. Determining to concentrate on my job, I threw the phone on the bed and went back to my workstation. My mind kept returning to Matthew as I sat there. I knew why he was impoverished. There had been a lot of gossip about Matthew's lover, a pretty young woman. Could an average man like Matthew truly pique the interest of someone like her? The solution appeared to be clear. Money had to be involved. It had been years since Matthew had helped pay for our living expenses. So, where had he been spending all of his money? Now it made sense. He probably spent money on her in an attempt to win her over with presents and a pricey apartment in a high-rise. However, it appeared like his facade was finally breaking down. He was having trouble paying the rent and was about to be evicted, based on what I had heard. He was displaying a false sense of financial independence. All of it was catching up with him, and he was solely responsible for it. I let out a long sigh, a mixture of relief and rage. While he was living in his fantasy world, I had been taking care of everything for so long. I was no longer burdened by that. It was none of my business what came next. For Matthew, his predicament was turning into a nightmare. His new wife must have been shocked to lose the apartment he once boasted about. Reality was quickly catching up with Matthew's desperate attempts to keep up his image in front of her. The flat wasn't really his in the first place. My mother-in-law owned it. After we got married and decided to live with her, she bought it for us. I recall being taken aback by her audacious choice. "You're new to each other," she had added with a smile. "However, you need at least have a comfortable and practical location to stay if you're going to live with your mother-in-law." I didn't believe she was serious, but she actually went ahead and bought the flat. But Matthew always claimed it as his own, as though it were a magnificent estate. He would refer to it as the tower apartment. He would reply smugly, "I'm heading back to my tower apartment." Every time he said that, I had to hold back my laughing because I thought it was funny. His dramatics made it sound more remarkable than it actually was. So hearing that he was now forced out of his tower apartment might have been hilarious to some, but I realized how serious it was for Matthew. Meanwhile, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. It vibrated on the bed again and again, revealing Matthew's name on the screen. I wondered quickly if he felt similarly annoyed when I had tried contacting him incessantly. The concept gave me pause. Was I acting like him now? That thought upset me. Why had I even considered it? I picked up the still buzzing phone in frustration and snapped a snap response. "Quit." "Matthew, what do you want?" I insisted. "My tower mansion was sold by you?" His voice was full of accusations as he screamed. "Your mansion in the tower?" I shot back, my voice icy. "Your mother owned that place. Did you ever truly own it? Naturally, the person who cared for her should inherit it now that she's gone. You didn't even pay her a visit in her last days. You're saying you deserve it now." "It's a joke." Matthew's tone became increasingly irritated. "I owned that flat. You were not authorized to sell it. I strongly said that it wasn't yours. It belonged to your mother. She left it up to me and her will to determine what to do with it. She desired for it to be given to a person who genuinely cared about her, not to a son who was unable of saying goodbye." "That is unacceptable," Matthew yelled. "It's not up to you," I said, maintaining a steady tone of voice in spite of my mounting annoyance. "Your mother made it plain that I would inherit her property, and she had every right to choose who would inherit it. It's your issue, not mine, if you don't like it." I had a headache from talking to Matthew. Was I genuinely in love with this self-centered man? It was unbelievable to me that I had ever found him attractive. His actions have caused a great deal of suffering over the years, not just to myself, but to his mom as well. She had frequently expressed to me her sadness over him. He consistently grumbled about the tiniest things, violated agreements, and refused to help out around the house. If he continues to behave in this manner, your relationship may not endure. At one point, her voice became worried. I comforted her back then. "Don't worry," I assured them. "Everything will work out." I genuinely thought we would stick together. It never occurred to me that everything would collapse so quickly. My mother-in-law advised me before she passed away that you may sell the flat or retain it if you and Matthew ever parted ways. Take whatever action you believe is best. She included it in her will as well. Matthew yelled, "You must have made that up." Anger rose in his voice. I let out a sigh and tapped my temples as I felt a surge of aggravation. "Matthew, I've made an effort to speak clearly with you. I phoned, texted, and even wrote an email, but you paid me no attention at all. And you believe you have the right to scream at me now that everything has happened?" His self-centeredness was intolerable. I made an effort to speak quietly. "Matthew, you need to examine yourself closely. Think back on your actions and how they caused this." But he hung up before I could say anything further, like he did every time. I shook my head while staring at the phone. I had to provide him some more crucial information. But what was the point? Matthew never bothered to listen, and his selfishness always won out. I came to a significant realization at that same time. I no longer had Matthew in my life. I had never heard of him before. Finally, the phone fell silent, allowing me to resume my job. After all the bustle, the quiet in my tiny flat felt like a blessing. I ended up standing at my mother-in-law's grave 6 months later. My mind was filled with recollections of her knowledge and kindness. "I'm sorry for selling the apartment you left me," I said quietly, placing flowers on her tombstone. "I hope you get it." For the first time in a long time, I felt a feeling of closure when a light breeze drifted through the cemetery. My life was progressing, one step at a time. She would have wanted the same for me, I knew. I was overcome with appreciation for everything my mother-in-law had done for me as I said my final goodbyes gently at her grave. "I sincerely appreciate what you've done." I put a soft touch on the gravestone and spoke, then turned to go. I was thinking about Matthew and his new partner on the way home. They must have had to relocate to a less opulent location when I sold the flat. To be honest, though, I was no longer concerned about it. I attempted to focus on my ride home as I was lost in contemplation, feeling a little lonely. I unexpectedly saw someone I knew. Matthew was the one. When he spotted me, his face tightened, and he came up behind me, his steps heavy and furious. A young lady with an equally distressed expression carried a baby in her arms. "You forced us to move into a dilapidated apartment," Matthew yelled. "You made money when you sold the opulent apartment? Give it to me." At his demand, I couldn't help but smile. "Are you still married then?" "Despite everything," I said, a little sarcastically. "The fact that you now reside in a rundown apartment is not my fault. It makes sense that you would find yourself in such a situation given your income. You never had the high-rise apartment in the first place. It was an anomaly rather than the norm," I said. "You really missed out, didn't you?" To his young wife, "Because of his apparent wealth, you were drawn to him, but now you're stuck with a regular guy who can't even afford a decent place to live." I was unable to contain my harsh words. I was a little cynical, but it was the reality. Still enraged, Matthew attempted to argue. "All will be well if you simply give over a portion of the funds. Consider the child and Lauren. They aren't treated fairly. Indeed, I'm having a lot of trouble now that I'm postpartum." With sadness in her voice, Lauren continued, "Living in such a horrible place is really depressing, especially if you have a baby." I stopped and listened to her. Her frustration made sense to me. Anyone in her shoes would be angry, but I had no control over their decisions. With a sigh, I said calmly, "Why don't you look for a part-time job if you want to improve your living conditions? You must make do with what you have." As though I had said something, they both looked at me in disbelief. Fury. Then, claiming that they were entitled to a high-rise lifestyle, they started to demonstrate loudly. It was astounding how entitled they were. "You exaggerate your circumstances a lot." With a colder tone, I said, "You're already living in a modest flat, and yet you act as if you're too good for it. How honorable can someone who has an affair really be?" My words hit hard, and Matthew's face turned red with anger. "Today is your mother's death anniversary," I continued sharply, "and here you are making selfish demands. Do you even feel any shame?" Matthew tried to argue, but his voice trembled. "I didn't know your address," he mumbled weakly. "Stop being so shameless," I snapped. "This is pitiful. Even the worst person who cheats might have earned some forgiveness if they showed compassion for the deceased. But you've shown nothing but selfishness." Taking a deep breath, I glanced at Lauren and the baby she was holding. The tension in the air was thick, but I knew there was something important that I needed to say. I turned back to Matthew. "There's something we need to discuss." I spoke aggressively. "It's about the baby." Matthew's anger flared again. "What about the baby?" he demanded. "There's a strong chance it's not even yours," I replied. Matthew's face twisted in anger. "Don't say such ridiculous things. You think you can just make baseless accusations." His voice was loud, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. Meanwhile, Lauren's face had gone pale, her expression filled with unease. "It's evident to everybody that we couldn't have children," I continued calmly. I saw a doctor myself when we were trying. They found no issues with me, and I even asked you several times to get checked. But you always refused. Matthew sneered, his words dripping with cynicism. So what? You're blaming me now? Not blaming, I responded, addressing his eyes. But I learned something crucial. Your mother once told me you had a severe fever as a youngster. She stated it may have caused infertility. That's why she felt so guilty. She also informed me that part of the reason she left me the apartment was because she blamed herself for your illness. She felt horrible that I couldn't have children because of it. Matthew's sarcastic smile disappeared. What are you discussing? He inquired, his voice softer now. I'm suggesting there's a chance the baby isn't yours, I said bluntly. If you truly want to know, you ought to get a DNA test performed. Matthew was totally deflated now. Although seconds before he had been full of rage and accusations. His face was inscrutable as he turned to face Lauren. Lauren's face, pale and nervous, ducked from his stare. Their silence said more than words could. Let's go, Matthew mumbled at last. He spoke in a tired voice. He turned and left without saying another word. As I watched them go, I had a range of feelings, including relief, grief, and closure, with Lauren trailing closely after with the baby in her arms. I was at last ready to move on from this chapter of my life. I was watching Matthew and Lauren go when I had an epiphany. I yelled after them. In addition, I will be requesting alimony for the psychological harm you inflicted on me. Matthew hesitated for a moment, but he didn't turn around without saying anything more. With those last remarks, they vanished into the distance. The lengthy ordeal seemed to be finally coming to an end. After a few months, I was too busy to verify who was calling, so I answered calls. One day while picking up, I heard a voice I didn't recognize. It's me. How are you doing? With hesitation yet familiarity, Matthew's voice emerged from the line. Confused, I scowled. What are you looking for? I'm busy, I curtly said. Pay attention. His tone was uncertain at first. I don't have that baby. After our final talk, I became skeptical and decided to get a DNA test. As it happens, you were correct. Lauren and I got divorced. Uncertain of the direction this was taking, I remained mute. How about we make a fresh start? With a tone that was almost imploring, Matthew continued. The ridiculousness of his idea made me laugh. Make a fresh start. That's unthinkable after everything you've done, I said. Living alone must be difficult for you. I went on. You want to depend on me once again now. You're out of luck if you're hoping for another opportunity. However, I could think about making you my secretary. I was aware that I no longer had any feelings for Matthew, but I believed I was being as giving as I could for my late mother-in-law. But that was not how Matthew saw it. Are you making fun of me? He lost his temper. As your secretary, I'm giving you one final opportunity to make amends. Calmly, I said, I don't need such an opportunity. You ought to stand back and consider the situation more impartially. The line may have died before I could finish. Like he often did when he didn't like what I had to say, Matthew had hung up on me. I shook my head and moaned. How immature, I whispered. His pride prevented him from seeing his own shortcomings, and he was hesitant to confront reality. He refused to accept responsibility for his decisions, and it was obvious that he would stay in his rundown apartment. However, I was no longer worried about it. I was happy to break the last link between us, so I blocked his phone and went back to work. I had utilized the money from the sale of the flat to launch a new company that provided me with a fresh start and a means of subsistence. Using my organizational skills and my expertise taking care of my mother-in-law, the business expanded rapidly in a matter of months. I had a thriving business and a group of employees. I used to think about how much of my success was because of my wonderful mother-in-law. No matter how busy I got, her kindness, encouragement, and advice set the groundwork for the life I currently lead. Every month on the anniversary of her death, I made it a point to go to her grave. I'd bring flowers, take a time to think, and tell her how much I appreciate everything she has done for me. I would never be able to express to Matthew how much I value her. However, that was irrelevant. I had created a new, purposeful, and hopeful life for myself. 2 months later, I stood at her grave and muttered, "Thank you for everything," with a kind smile. "I'll continue to try my hardest." I went back to work with fresh resolve, prepared to take on any obstacles that might arise. I was no longer defined by my history. I was determined to take each day as it came and make the best of my new existence.